Welcome to the annual Amelia Island Book Festival's awards ceremony with global best-selling author and our honorary chairman, David Baldacci. It's a pleasure for us to be providing these awards, particularly in light of the COVID pandemic that we all faced during the past year. And unfortunately, we couldn't do this live, but we're looking forward to being able to do it in next year in 2022. The awards tonight will include the short story writing contest story, which was an online operation, as well as the annual AEL Foundation $5,000 scholarship, which will be awarded to one Nassau County high school senior to further their college education. Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people here. First of all, I want to thank Joelle Crahy. She's one of our board members and chairperson of the short story contest committee. I want to thank her committee members and the judges as well. I also want to thank our Vice President, Paige Forey, who managed the AEL Scholarship Foundation process. And finally, Brant Kelch, who is our author coordinator, was particularly active in this endeavor this year, and we want to thank him as well. We received a number of short story applications this year, but one of the things that we noticed was the quality of those applications. The stories were wonderful, they were thoughtful, they were imaginative, and they were of the highest quality that we could have possibly expected. So I want to thank all of you who wrote the stories and submitted your stories for the time and effort that you put into that. And we will look forward to honoring you and announcing the awards following the workshop that Mr. Baldacci will be providing us. But first of all, it's my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome our 2021 honorary chairman, David Baldacci, who will be conducting a workshop for all of our online student writers this evening. David is a global #1 best-selling author and one of the world's favorite storytellers. His books are published in over 45 languages and in more than 80 countries. 150 million copies have been sold worldwide. His works have been adapted for both feature film and television. David has also published 7 novels for young readers like yourselves. In addition to being a prolific writer, David is the co-founder, along with his wife Elizabeth, of the Wish You Well Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting literacy programs across America. A lifelong Virginian, David graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University and the University of Virginia School of Law. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce David Baldacci.
Hello, thank you very much for that. It's a great introduction. Everybody see me okay? Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
One more announcement here that Bob has asked me to read. Bob Forey is our technical director, who I also meant to thank, and he'll be our moderator this evening. All of those in attendance are asked to please use the Zoom chat function to send your questions to the AIBF moderator, Bob. Please include your age, grade, and school when you send your question. And if you have any questions or need help, please email help@ameliaislandbookfestival.org. And David, I return to you. Thanks so much.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. First, I'd like to say congratulations to everybody who participated in this program and wrote their stories and submitted them. And congratulations to all the award winners. And obviously, I'm looking forward to get their award later on. You know, workshops can be done lots of different ways, and I thought about what was the best way to do this one. So I thought maybe I would just take you through sort of my journey. I started out probably younger than some of you, to pursue, what I wanted to do writing wise. But even before that, I have to say that I think one of the main reasons I am a writer today is because I was a reader as a kid. I would go to the library every week and check out, as many books as I possibly could. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. Never really left that area when I was a kid. Um, but I got to see, I got to see the world through books. And I got to see people that didn't look like me or talk like me or pray like me or learn like me. But I saw our common core of humanity. And that really made a great impression on me. When I grew up in the South in the 60s and 70s, it was a deeply segregated time period. And I could have grown up with a different perspective in life, but books really changed me for the better. And it also made me want to, think about making my own stories. I grew up in a time when there was no internet, no computers, nothing. So my job in the summer and after school was over was to sort of plan all of our adventures in the neighborhood. So all the battles we would fight, all the adventures we would have. And I love sort of choreographing that, just using my imagination. And when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my mom gave me a journal, a blank page book to write some of my stuff down, some of the stories I've been talking about forever. And as soon as my pen hit the paper, it was kind of like an epiphany. All the books that I loved reading, suddenly dawned on me I could create one of my own. I could create some stories that other people might be able to read and enjoy. And I just started writing. And as many as all of you did during this exercise, you wrote short stories. And that's what I started doing when I was first started out, with short stories. Short stories are great for a beginning writer. One thing is they're short, so you're not faced with writing a 400-page novel from the starting gate. But the cool thing about short stories are they have all the elements of long story format. They have characters, they have plots, they have narratives, they have dialogue. So I was able to cut my teeth over many years of just writing short stories about lots of different subjects, lots of different people. And it was a way for me to sort of learn my craft, as all of you will learn your craft if you continue on with your writing. It's not something you ever master. I've been doing this most of my life, but it's not something you ever master or perfect. All you can do each day is get up and try to get a little bit better. And if you can accomplish that and do that, then that is a good day. It's scary, at least it was for me, maybe it was for you, to write something that's very personal, that didn't exist before you thought of it, and then send it out to complete strangers to sort of evaluate. I guess it's sort of like taking a test, but it's more than taking a test. The tests are just testing your knowledge of something. When you write a story, you created something, and it's totally a piece of you. And you send it out to someone you may not know at all, and they may not like it or they may like it, but it can be nerve-wracking, it can be scary. But I want to let you know that it's all part of the process. And I think you should feel really good about that you're allowing someone to read something that didn't exist anywhere before you sat down and you created it. That's the great thing about writing. Many jobs, you're just building something that already existed or making more of them. But with writing, any creative process, you're actually taking something that didn't exist before and bringing it to the world for other people to read and enjoy. So I congratulate all of you who took the time to write the stories and then submitted them to people to be evaluated. It's not an easy thing to do. At least it wasn't for me. When I started sending my stuff out, it was pretty nerve-wracking. I didn't know if they were going to like it or hate it, or I'd never hear back from them. Those were all possibilities. So you've done two important things during this program. You've written a story and you finished it. And I can tell you that 99% of the people who come up to me when I'm at events and they say, I love to write a story. I'd love to write a book. I'd love to write something. And they never do. So you've already gotten over that hump. And then the other hump is you've actually taken something you've written and you've sent it out to other people to read and evaluate. And almost nobody does that either. So you got over the second biggest hump out there. So you should feel good about that. When I was first starting out, I tended to write about things that I knew a little bit about, small town, growing up, people that I'd met along the way, things that I liked to do, things that I was interested in. And I would sort of use those as the basis for my short stories. It could be something to do with family, something to do with friends. But it always tended to be something that I sort of had experience about or had some interest in. And as you continue on in your writing career, I would say it's good to write about things that you know something about because you'll be interested in that. But if you really want to broaden your horizons and have a lengthy career, I would add this advice. Don't always write about things you know about, but write about things that you would like to know about. The one thing that can improve your writing, your research, your characters is if you have really a great deal of passion for what you're writing about. And that may sound like very intuitive. Of course, why would I write about something if I'm not passionate about it? But it happens all the time. You know, people just want to write something down and they think it might be interesting or it might be trendy or people might like it. And so you write it without really having a passion for it. And that lack of passion comes through in your prose, it comes through in your plot, it comes through in your character. It's hard to write anything, you know, and the passion part is how you fill up your creative tank. And if your gas tank is not full, you're not going to make it to the end of the story. It's just going to be balled up into a piece of paper or erased off your computer screen. That's going to be the end of it. So choose wisely when you want to write about something. Um, Short stories, I moved on to writing screenplays for film. Um, and I did that for no other reason than a friend of mine went out to LA and tried to break into film as a producer, and he brought back a screenplay. I'd never seen a screenplay before. And a screenplay is a very different beast. And I only tell you this because even though we're talking about short stories now, a lot of short stories have been aptly adapted into screenplays and then filmed and made into a movie or TV series. But it's just another form of writing. The whole core behind any type of writing is you're telling a story. It could be a short story of 10 pages. It could be a screenplay of 100 pages. It could be a novel of 400 pages. But the core element is the story, you know, and whether it's a novel or a screenplay or a short story just really depends on the length and the complexity of it. So I read the screenplay that my friend had brought back with him, and I thought this is really interesting because unlike any other type of writing I'd ever done, I'm going to write the screenplay and nobody's ever going to see the script except the people involved in filming the movie. Everybody else is going to see it on a screen, you know, on a wall with dialogue and video, as you can hear. So I spent a number of years writing screenplays for film and had a number of those adapted. I've adapted one of my own books for film. And it's an interesting experience. When you wrote your short stories, you were it. You know, you were the only mind looking at this, the only pair of eyes looking at this and creating it. And that's the way it should be. In the same way, when I write my novels, I'm, you know, unless my editors look at stuff, but I create it. It's very different with a screenplay, for those of you interested in film. With a screenplay, it's a collaboration of lots of different people. And the lead is not the writer, the lead of that ship is the director. And one of the cool things that I found for those of you who are interested in screenplay writing is that when I would try to compose a scene, particularly with dialogue between two actors, I tended to sort of resort back to my novel instincts and I would kind of overwrite it. And I put too many words in their mouths until I learned that I had a terrific asset that I could lean on. I could lean on the actors actually acting. You know, so instead of giving them, you know, a whole page of dialogue, how about I give them one line each and just let their features and their expressions tell the rest of what I was trying to tell through the dialogue. So with screenplays, it's a collaborative affair and you have help that you don't have when writing other types of things like short stories and novels. And that was a big learning experience for me. And I had already been, you know, in the business for about 15 years when that experience happened to me, but I've never forgotten it. And you said, okay, it works for screenplays, but it also works for anything else you want to write. Because I've taken that experience with the screenplays, and when I go to write my novels, I write them even leaner than I did before. It's easy to write a whole bunch of words down. It's harder to select just the right words. I'll give an example about, you know, President Lincoln. He made a habit of writing to every mother that he could. He couldn't do it all, obviously, the numbers are too high. Every mother who lost a son in the Civil War, he would write a condolence letter to. And the most famous one he ever wrote was to a mother who unfortunately lost all 5 of her sons in the war. And so he began the letter saying, "Dear Mrs. So-and-so, I apologize for the length of this letter. If I had more time to write it, it would have been far shorter." And he didn't mean that as an insult to her. He just meant that he would have been able to choose the words far more carefully, and the overall message would have been far more powerful. The greatest political speech ever written in this country is the Gettysburg Address. It's only 345 words long. Abraham Lincoln delivered it in about 2 minutes. It was so short, in fact, that most of the people there that day didn't even realize that he had actually gotten up and delivered the speech. But every word counted. Every word was powerful. Every word was memorable. And that's why it's the most potent political speech ever, because he took the time to carefully choose every word. And in a short story, which all of you have just done, unlike in a novel with 120,000 words, I can coast in places. You know, I don't have to pick the exact right word for every page in there, because I have lots of other words to deal with, and I can fudge a little bit. In a short story, you can't. In a short story, every single word is so important because there aren't that many of them, and they're going to stand out if they sound sort of hackneyed, if they sound wooden, if they sound just not right. There's no place to hide in a short story, which is why short stories are so wonderful for all of you to sort of begin your writing careers on. They are short, but they're brutal because there's no hiding places for you. It really teaches you to try to manage the language. If you can say in 5 excellent, wonderfully chosen words what you could otherwise say in 100 sort of overweight, flabby words, go with the former over the latter, because what you're saying will be far more powerful. Because all the other stuff that you've written in 100 words, people just sort of tend to lose the message. There's just too much there. So in anything you write, try to be direct, declarative, and think about each word, because each word has power. Because look at it this way, the readers are going to read every word you write. So you just try to put as much as you can into every word that you compose for your stories. People always ask me, where do you get your ideas? You should ask yourself, where do you get your ideas from? And at least for me, I get my ideas. I wake up every morning and I walk out the door. And I sort of like to call it looking at the world through the writer's prism. So looking at the world through this as a writer is not really going to get you anywhere. You know, when I walk down the streets, 99% of the people are just staring at their phones. They see nothing around them. They don't see anybody. They don't eavesdrop on conversations. They don't see something interesting that might be happening. The writer's prism for me is when you walk down the street and you see 2 people talking, it's not 2 people talking. It's you're wondering about what they're talking about and what's going to happen to one of those people when they leave that conversation and they walk around the corner. Who's going to be around that corner for them to meet? Or a person passing by in a bus, where are they going and what's going to happen to them when they get there? If you add a couple of interesting fictional facts to the story. So anytime you walk outside, anytime you talk to anybody, anytime you're, ride somewhere, see anything, it's not just seeing what's out there. It's seeing the possibility of what is out there if you just use your imagination and add some pixie dust to it and wonder about the possibilities. Every story ever written is one person sitting down and just wondering about possibilities. What could happen if I just imagine something happening based on something that I might have seen, something that I might have overheard. I was in school, I was sort of a big eavesdropper. I just have this curiosity about people. And I think most writers do. You want to see what makes them do what they do. If you write about a character in one of your stories that does something really extreme or outlandish or extraordinary, you have to sort of match that motivation. If you're asking your character to do something really out there has to be a good reason for it. Otherwise, you're going to run into the implausibility wall. And the implausibility wall is you've asked them to do this incredible thing and you give them no reason to do it at all. And the reader will look at that and go, that doesn't make any sense to me. I understand that people can do crazy things from time to time, but give them a reason why. And the reasons why sometimes are even more exciting and intriguing than what they actually did. The backstory for why they would do something so extraordinary. So when you go out, your story material can come from every waking moment you have. Walk out the door, talk to people, see things, experience things. Try every time you take a trip. I take journals with me. I'm sure probably some of you do too. And I write things down because you never know when ideas might pop in. I love talking to people and let them, unlike right now where I'm doing all the talking, I don't like really to talk when I'm around people. I know everything there is to know about me. I will never say anything that will fascinate me about myself. but I love listening to other people because that's how you learn. That's how you understand what people are thinking about, what motivates them to do certain things, what drives them in their life, what they think is important or significant. The more you learn about people, the more interesting characters you can sort of compose and put together. I've never taken a real person from real life and dropped them into a story, but I've taken little bits and pieces of pretty much everybody I've met in my life, grafting little idiosyncrasies off of them, and then put them into characters that I've created, because I think that's fair game. You know, part of being a writer is being an observer and understanding what makes people tick. So don't feel badly about that. It's just part of how you sort of build up, you know, your skill and craft as a writer. And the other thing I would say is that to have a lengthy career as a writer, to not only be curious, but to crave information. You know, you have knowledge bases in your life, but you need to continually fill them up all the time. As life goes on, you know, and things change, if you want to write about contemporary events, then you have to know about them. You know, I made, you know, I'm a lot older than all of you. But if I want to write about contemporary things, I can't write about them as if they existed in the year 2000 or the year 1990 or even the year 2010. I have to write about things that are happening in 2021, and I have to write about things that people are familiar with. So I can't, you know, have a character doing something, trying to figure out an issue in a book when all they had to do was pick up their smartphone and they could Google it. So being up to date on what's going on in the world is really important if you want to be plausible and realistic to readers. But it's even more than that. It's if you know a lot about a lot of different subject matters, then as a writer, then all of a sudden you can look across this breadth of information you have, and you can sort of suddenly take a little piece out of one pot, a little piece of another pot, and a little piece of another pot, and combine them into a story that no one's ever done before, because no one's had that exact breadth of knowledge that you've had. But if you don't have those knowledge pots in your head, because you haven't filled them up over time and continually fill them up, then you're never going to have that opportunity really bring very different subjects together into a single story. And what's cool about it is it's really challenging. And one of the exercises that I used to give to students way back, you can do it with a newspaper. Probably none of you ever read a newspaper anymore. So do it with something online. Go to an information source online. Go to a news feed online. Take one story from one news feed, take a totally unrelated story from another news feed, and write a short story combining both of those elements and those stories together plausibly. Totally different news feeds, totally different stories, and take the elements of each of those stories and put it together in one short story and write about it in a way that is totally plausible and actually would fit together. And people would look at that and go, that makes total sense. And why it seems very simple, but why it's such a great exercise, it massively ignites your imagination to make that connection really work. You know, if the stories are totally different and have seemingly no connection at all together, then your imagination is going to be firing on all cylinders to try to find some connection that would make that work. And really then your mind comes sort of like a nanocomputer. You are processing and synthesizing a million different possibilities all at once until you arrive at the exact right one that you want to do to make sure those two stories can be combined into one in a very plausible way. When you're writing anything, whether it be a short story or a novel or anything in between, at every juncture of the story, you have a million options, a million different directions you can go in. And it can seem overwhelming at times, and you can almost paralyze yourself because you're like, oh my God, how can I go through a million different types of variations to arrive at the exact right one? The answer to that is you can. Your brain can do that, you know. And I can tell you, you know, after having written 50 novels and probably 50 short stories and a dozen screenplays, your brain can accomplish that. It really can. It's the most amazing thing, and most amazing part of what we have as a human being is the brain. You know, it dictates who we are, it dictates what our personality is, it dictates what we can achieve in life. But it is the epicenter of our creative spirit. You know, there's no other substitute for it. So know going in that, yes, There can be a lot of choices at every juncture in the story, but you will be able to process them. And here's the other piece of advice, and then I'd like to get into, getting some Q&A from all of you, because I don't really just sit up here and talk. When you're putting a story together, there are lots of different ways and lots of different things that you can do to sort of make that story compelling and cohesive and make it matter to people that you want to have it matter to. And there are lots of different ways that you can do that. You have to find your own process. There are some writers out there that they like to have a certain quantity of work each day. So they will, write 5 pages a day, or they'll write 2,000 words a day. And once they hit that number, then that's their job for the day. That's their work that they've done for the day. And the next day they'll come back and do the same thing. Me personally, I don't count words or pages. I tend to be a sort of writer that I write until my tank is empty each day, no matter how many words or pages I accomplish or how little I accomplish. Some days nothing comes out, but that's okay too. So don't get too focused on what is the correct process to be a writer. Should I count pages? Should I count words? Should I do it this way? Do it that way? The simple answer is do it the way which is most comfortable for you. And that process may change over time. I've changed the way that I write over the course of, 35 years of doing this. And there's nothing wrong with that either, because sometimes the needs for a particular story or just a particular time in your life dictates that change. The wonderful thing about the creative process, it's infinitely flexible. You can change anything about it that you want to, so long as you feel comfortable doing it. There's no right way to do it, and there's no wrong way to do it. I have lots of writer friends, and we all approach the craft differently. That doesn't make it wrong. It makes it right for you if that process works for you. And that's something that you will figure out over time. And again, it may change, and there's nothing wrong with that. I guess the last piece of advice I would say is, and I'm sure all of you understand this, writing is hard. Again, I've been doing it a long time, and every time I sit down to write something new, I'm scared to death that I just can't bring it. Whatever I brought last time and was able to finish something, that it's not going to be there this time. And that's okay. Fear is a great antidote to complacency. I had a writer friend he wrote screenplays, a lot of great screenplays. He's won 2 Oscars for his screenplays. He gave me some of the best advice I remember to this day. He said that the day you think you know what you're doing as a writer is the day you should stop being a writer and go do something else, because that's when you've lost your edge. That edge of that creative spark, that fear that you don't know what you're doing. And to this day, I'm not really sure I know what I'm doing. All I know is that if I have an idea and I want to tell a story, then I sit down with my pen or paper or my computer and I start to write it. I'm not really sure where I'm going with it, but that's the cool thing about the creative process. It is a journey for all of us. It'll be a journey for the readers reading it. It's a journey for you as the writer creating it. There's no set path, no set schedule for how to do this. I write by the seat of my pants oftentimes, and I just rely on what I've done as a writer in the past, how I've learned my craft, how I feel the stories being. The reason I sort of like to write by my seat of my pants and not from an outline that tells me everything I'm supposed to write in the story that I created a month ago before I even got into writing the story. Let's say you want to learn how to drive a Formula One car. There are 2 ways to do it. You can read a book about how to drive a Formula One car really fast, or you can drive a Formula One car really fast. And the difference is this: I can write an outline, on a legal pad, and it could be longer than the novel. It'll tell me everything I'm supposed to put into the story. And then I get into actually writing the story, and I realize that none of it works. Why? Because when you're writing the story, you're in the trenches. You're actually with the characters. You're actually moving them through their paces, telling them what they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to say. And there are like a million different interactions going on at the same time. None of that happens in an outline. An outline is just sort of a very static document about what you would like the story to be, even though you're not in the story at the moment. So writing an outline where you haven't even met the characters, it's really difficult to actually write about those characters because they could turn out to be totally different from what you envision them to be in the outline. I use outlines. I do miniature outlines for little parts of the book, a chapter here, a chapter there as I go through. And that's once I'm immersed in and in the trenches of writing the story. And it's just a total difference. And again, the caveat to all of you is that's the way I do it. That does not need to be the way that you do it. I know a lot of very successful writers who outline every single thing and then they write it from the outline and they're very successful and they've had great careers. So I'm not saying don't do it that way if you're comfortable. I'm just saying for me, I get to know my characters, not from an outline. I get to know my characters by jumping onto the page with them and writing about them. That's the best way I know to get my characters and to drive them through the paces of the story. Because when you're in that, there's no substitute for being in the moment with the story, not an outline or anything else. The only way you can do it is you're in the story, in the moment with your characters. And that's where I like to sort of spend my creative energy. Because when you're in the moment, your mind is firing, is about as well as it's ever going to fire off creatively, at least for me. That's where the ideas come from. That's where the mind is just going a million miles an hour and all these really great ideas and concepts are coming out of it. The last thing I'll say is it's frustrating and it's hard to create anything. I don't care whether it's a 5-page short story or a 500-page novel. It's hard. It's frustrating. You can have good days, you can have bad days. You can have good days where every sentence sparkles and it came out easily. You can have bad days where you want to take your laptop and throw it right through the window. And that's perfectly normal because that happens to every single writer out there, and it certainly happens to me. But here, if you remember nothing else that I've talked about over the last 30 minutes, remember this: in the midst of all this frustration, sometimes in the bad days when you want to hurl your computer, keep this in mind. You're spending your time and hopefully one day making your living by making stuff up. As a little kid, you did it for free, but you're making stuff up. So the key is to remember yourself as a little kid making stuff up. And guess what you had when you were a little kid making stuff up? You had some fun. You had fun. And that may sound simple and all that, but trust me, the fun component of this will get you through the gauntlet of all the other stuff you need to get through in order to have writing as a career, in order to get through the stories, in order to get better. Because if you hate every minute of what you're doing while you're trying to create something, it's going to show up in the story, and it's not going to show up in a really good way. So while you're creating this stuff, remember to have some fun while you're doing it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering some of your questions.
Thank you very much, David. Young ladies and young gentlemen, given the amount of time that we have this evening and the size of the crowd, I'm going to unmute the phones, and please address David Baldacci. Please give your name, the grade that you're in, and the school that you attend, and then go ahead and ask your question directly with David. Again, I'm going to unmute the phones in just a second, or unmute you in just a second, and allow you to ask David the questions directly.
Hi, Mr. Baldacci. I'm JP Nedelku, a senior at Fernandina Beach High School. I wanted to ask, what do you consider is the best way to cut the fluff from your stories, like unnecessary, unimportant stuff?
If you, I'll answer this truthfully and faithfully because I just did it with a novel I'm working on. My rule of thumb is that, particularly if you've done a lot of research and you're really proud of the research and you want to put the research in paragraph after paragraph, that's okay. But it has to pass the selection test. If it doesn't further develop a character, if it doesn't provide readers with information they absolutely have to know to follow the story, and if it doesn't develop a character and push the narrative forward in the story, it need not and should not be in the story. And if you look at it from that perspective, it's pretty easy to cut the fluff. And if you read a lot, and I'm sure you do, you can tell where the experiences are that just you didn't need to really know that. You can sort of excise them in your mind. Or, as you're reading it, you might flip past the stuff. It's like, yeah, I get that point. Let me just move on with the story, back to the story. And I call that, sort of, that is the writer really liking to hear him or her write, where you say in 100 words, what you could say in 5. So if you break it down to, here's the information I need to convey, here's the atmosphere to these people, to the reader. But if it doesn't, if the character doesn't provide information they actually need to know, or doesn't push the narrative forward, those 3 questions, if it's no, then it has to go.
All right.
Does anyone else have any questions for David Baldacci this evening?
I know, if I were you, I wouldn't be asking questions either. I'd be like, well, no, but anything really you'd like to ask, I'd be glad to answer. No pressure at all, just a conversation.
I hear somebody whispering a question. Don't be shy. I've been tongue-tied too, but don't let that stop you from asking the question that you want to ask tonight and you'd like David to answer. We have one question from the audience that someone did not want to ask directly.
Okay.
David, they want to know how long it took for you to write and publish your first work.
My very first published work was my first novel, Absolute Power. Took about 3 years to write it. It took longer because I was working full time as a trial lawyer in Washington, D.C. But before that, I'd been writing for about 15 years, writing short stories, screenplays, novellas. And I think that because I'd gone through, that many years of learning the craft and writing lots of different things, and also getting positive feedback and constructive criticism from lots of different people. And my first novel was a huge success. And it seemed like to people that I was sort of an overnight success because the book just came out and off I went. I like to tell people that I had the typical writer's, sort of trajectory. I was an overnight success. It took about 6,000 nights to get there. But there's nothing wrong with that either. And you'll find that every writer who has an established career as a writer and can do it full time, they've gone through that same process. It's not something that success is going to happen overnight for people, nor should it. It's a craft that takes a lot of time to learn how to do well. And those who stick with it, they get better. The chances of actually being successful are considerably enhanced. And I'm an example of that, and most every other writer that you know and read, they are also examples of that. So that's why I say it's, I've always felt that people are really meant to be writers are going to be writers. And people ask me, what do you write? And the answer is very simple. I write because I can't not write. I can't get up during the day and not have the ability to be able to write something. It's not a job or a hobby or even a passion. It's who I identify as. So if you take it away from me, you've pretty much taken everything that I represent away from myself. And so because of that, and 15 years of writing stuff and not really having anything to show for it other than getting better as a writer, if I really didn't love it, if it really wasn't a part of who I was, I probably would have stopped. I probably would have quit long before and say, why am I slamming my head against the wall? This is crazy, 15 years and I have nothing to show for it. But I did. I'd gotten a lot better when I first started out. And I didn't really have an option because it was such a part of my life that I couldn't walk away from it. And I think a lot of writers who eventually will make it have the exact same feeling about it.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that answer. We have a question from the audience tonight.
Great.
Miss Bailey Foraker has a question for you. She's in grade 9. And Bailey, I'll go ahead and announce the question because it looks like you're still on mute. Bailey would like to know, do you work on one novel at a time or multiple novels? Personally, she has to stick to one project at a time or she gets distracted.
For the most part, over the course of my career, I worked on one novel at a time. The only time I ever worked on 2 novels at a time is when they're very, very different. I wrote an adult thriller set in contemporary times. At the same time, I was writing a young adult fantasy set in a very different time period. Those books were so different, it was easy for me to sort of go back and forth. The only other time that I've done them is when the time period has been very different. I write a series that was set in the late 1940s, sort of detective crime noir. At the same time, I wrote a contemporary film in 2021. And I had sort of my little personal time machine. I would zip back and forth between the 2 genres. But I totally agree with what you're saying. And for most of my career, at one book at a time, total focus, because that's often what is required. So if that's the way you're doing it, I think you're doing it right.
Thank you, David. Another question that just came in is, how important is it to go to college and major in literature to be a good writer?
It's not a prerequisite, I can tell you that. I was a political science major. So all I did in college, I read a lot of great books and I wrote a lot of great papers. I never took a creative writing course at all. So there are a lot of writers out there who are very established, who've been very successful, who didn't go to college, who never took a creative writing course, did not major in literature. They had very different backgrounds. I was a lawyer. So no, you don't have to go to college and you don't have to major in a particular field in order to be a writer. I just think that it's hard to define, but since all of you have written things, I'll just say that I think writers know who they are and they want to put things down. They're curious about life. They like to watch people. They like to see what makes people tick. They like to describe things. They like to walk in a room and observe details. They like to think about big issues. And they also like to think about very small issues and details as well, and how to build a world out of something that didn't exist before. So regardless of whether you go to college or not, or major in any particular field, you're always going to have that component of your personality. And that's really what it is. It's an essential part of who you are. So when you walk into a room, you don't walk into a room like other people do and immediately, just sort of start talking to somebody and talking about yourself and not seeing anything else around you. When I was growing up, I will date myself. There was a really cool kids book called Harriet the Spy. I think they made a movie out of it or TV series out of it later on. But she kept a journal on all of her friends and her experiences. And that journal was discovered and got in a lot of trouble with her friends. But the point is that she was a writer because when she walked into any place or interacted with anybody, she looked at it through the writer's prism of, this could be memorable. Let me remember this in time. Let me add some of my stuff to it and see if I can make it even more extraordinary. And later I'm going to go and I'm going to write about it. And that's really the whole kit and caboodle. And you don't have to go to college or major in literature to do that.
Thank you, David. We have a question from Miss Brandy Whaley, grade 8, Callahan Middle School. Brandy would like to know, how do you plan out your characters for each book?
That's a great question. I'd like to, with each novel, unless it's a series that has recurring characters, let's say I'm starting from scratch with a new novel and brand new characters, I like to have at least an idea of who's going to be carrying the narrative load in the story, who's going to be sort of the main protagonist. And again, you could have multiple protagonists. It could be an ensemble where you have a number of people who are going to have different roles. You sort of know, the arc of what the story is going to be, the journey people are going to take, what's going to happen, significant events along the way, and what they're going to have to go through, and you can sort of put your team together. And then you have to look at it and think to yourself, okay, here are, I don't know everything's going to happen in the story, but here are a few things they might encounter along the way. So if I want them to be able to make their way plausibly through all of these things, what sort of essential elements do I need to put into their personalities and their characters? Do they need to be athletic? Do they need to be really smart? Do they need to know certain something to get through this? Do they have to have any idiosyncrasies or personality quirks about them? Do I want to give them a certain condition? Do I want them to have some emotional baggage? Maybe they had something really bad that happened in life. Maybe they lost somebody when they were really young, and that has affected them. So really, when you're building the characters, you build them completely in sync with sort of the story you're trying to tell. Because I know when I say character and plot and all that, it seems like they're all different. In some ways they are. But they're also essentially tied together. It's like they're super glued together. The story doesn't work without the characters, and the characters don't work without the story. And at some point, the characters are the story. So what I like to do is sort of envision what the story will entail in certain respects, and see what sort of characters I need in order to have that. Like the young adult fantasy I wrote with this character called Vega Jane, I knew there was going to be this world she was going to be inhabiting. It was really tough and hard and not modern at all. No modern conveniences. So I thought, okay, I want her to be feisty. I want her to be independent, because at some point she's going to break out of this world. So I couldn't have her just be sort of very meek and timid. In most ways, she had to have the potential, at least, being able to have the courage and the strength to step up and say, this is wrong, this is not right, I'm being lied to, I want out of here. So if at some point that character is going to have to stand up and say that, then you have to build something into that character that at the point, when it comes to the point where she has to get up and say that, the readers won't go, wait a minute, where did that come from? She never showed any potential of that at all. And it doesn't have to be much. It could be one scene early on in foreshadowing where she does something where, she might be pounded on every day, but at one point she stood up for herself, to sort of allow the readers to go, okay, she's got something in her. She's got a little gas in the tank I didn't see before. And then later when she has her big moment in time, they can understand that because she had that potential inside of her. Sometimes applying sort of the goals and the gauntlets and the obstacles you're going to push them through will sort of dictate to you how you're starting to fill out who their characters are. Good question.
Thank you again, David. And thank you, Brandy, for that wonderful question. We have time for just a few more. And we do have another one from Miss Bailey. And Bailey would like to ask you, David, how much time is there in general between when you first come up with the idea for the novel and then you start writing?
That's a really good question. I like to really let the idea simmer in my head for a few weeks, because early on in my career, I would get a great idea and I was like, oh my God, this is a great idea. And I would sit down and start writing it, and 30 pages in, I realized it's just not working. I hadn't thought it through. There wasn't enough potential in the story to justify what I was trying to write, whether it be a screenplay or a novella or a short story or a novel. And I just ran out of gas and interest. So now when I come up with an idea, I really start jotting down some arcs. And when I say arcs, I mean potential storyline and subplots emanating out from sort of the underlying plot. And I just want to see if I'm going to write a novel, it's got to have the legs to sustain 400 pages or so. And the only way you sort of get there is you test it. You sort of kick the tires and say, okay, here's what I want it to be. Let me see how much juice this story has. Is it going to be able to sustain the length that I need it to be able to sustain? And the way I do that is I just sort of sit down, get out my pads or my computer, and I start running some arcs through my head. Here's this character. Here's what I want them to try to accomplish. Here's this other character. Here's a couple of subplots that I think might have some narrative drive that I can push through the story. And once I get to the point where I feel like there is enough there, then I will test it by, there's no greater feeling than writing that first page, no greater feeling than writing that first chapter. It's all new and fresh and exhilarating and exciting and scary. And I love first chapters for that very reason. But I think if you can get through that first chapter or two, and the drive and excitement is still there, and even more importantly, the first two chapters in your head have driven a lot more ideas that you could use later on in the novel. A lot of other things, not subplots, other characters and peripherals and tangents and twists and turns. That's always a good sign, but I would definitely kick the tires for a few weeks to make sure that it's actually going to be what you want it to be.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And thank you to JP and Bailey and Brandy for submitting your questions live. And those of you who submitted your questions over chat, we really appreciate that. And at this point in the event this evening, I'd like to turn it back over to Larry Williams, the president of the Amelia Island Book Festival. And Larry's going to talk about the short story contest and the other contests that we have and announce the winners for this evening.
Thank you, Bob. And I want to thank David for that candid, inspirational, and informative presentation. I'm sure that meant a lot to the students and to all of us here who are listening to this presentation. I also want to thank the student writers for some great questions. They really nailed it in terms of, being specific and being well thought out. And David's answers, of course, were wonderful. And I think this has been a teaching moment for all of us. One of the things that went through my mind as I listened was that I wish I had had the opportunity to speak to someone like David when I was young and in school and had some ideas about what I might want to write and never had the opportunity to do. So I really hope that all of you found this to be an absolutely excellent presentation. And David, again, we thank you very much. In addition to being our 2020 and 2021 honorary chair, David's also going to continue to be our 2022 honorary chairman. So we will all have the opportunity, hopefully in person next February, to join him in our annual festivities. And now it is my pleasure to announce the short story contest winners for 2021. And I'm going to start with the middle school winners. First prize in the middle school category goes to 8th grader Kanan McCosh at the Callahan Middle School. And Kanan will be receiving a $175 award. Second prize goes to Madison B. Morris at the Amelia Island Montessori School, where she is a 7th grader. She wrote Gabriella, Bannister, and Athena. And I want to go back for a minute to Kanan's writing. He wrote the short story House of the Seven. Third prize goes to Brandy Whaley, and she's an 8th grader at Callahan Middle School, who wrote The Summer of 2025. She will be receiving a $75 award. We have 2 honorable mentions in the middle school category. The first being Lila Kirk, who is a 7th grader at Faith Christian Academy, for writing The Unexpected Happening, and she will be a $50 award winner. The Best Suspense Story award goes to 6th grader from Amelia Island Montessori School, Gabriel Marquez, who wrote The Wrench and the Key, and he will be receiving $50 as well. Now I'm going to go to our high school winning category. First prize goes to Bailey Foraker, a 9th grader at the Florida Virtual School, for the short story The Unexpected Happening. And Bailey will be receiving a $175 award for her efforts. We have a tie for 2nd place. And first of all is Carolyn Zelik. She's a 12th grader at the Fernandina Beach High School. And she wrote Why Frogs Are Heard Croaking During a Rainstorm. She'll be receiving a $100 award. Our other 2nd prize winner is John Paul Nedelku. He's a 12th grader at Fernandina Beach High School who wrote Truck Stop. He'll be receiving $100. Our 3rd place winner is Ella Das, also a 12th grader at Fernandina Beach High School, who wrote Note, and she will be receiving $75. Our Best Imagery award goes to Isabel Callstrand, who is a 12th grader at Fernandina Beach High School, for writing Humans in the Sky, and she's a $50 award winner. The award for most surprising ending goes to 12th grader from Fernandina Beach High School, Corbin Gomez, and Corbin will be receiving a $50 award. We have 2 honorable mentions in the high school category. The first, Elizabeth Lyden, a 12th grader at Fernandina Beach High School, who wrote He Played Piano. She'll be receiving a $50 award. And finally, Sierra Baldwin, who is a 12th grader homeschooler, who wrote Ekoria, will be receiving a $50 award. We have a couple of special mentions. First of all, and both from the Callahan Middle School, 8th grade. The first one being Micaiah Amos, the second being Shelley Whaley, both of whom will receive $25 awards. And finally, from the Boys and Girls Club students and sisters, Ashley Little and Natalie Little, both 7th graders. Ashley wrote Dragon Adventures and Natalie wrote Show and Tell Adventures. And both of them will be receiving a combined $75 award for both of them. So those are our winners of the short story contest. You've done a fabulous job this year. The quality of the writing, as I said previously, was just outstanding this year, and you're all to be credited for the fine work that you did. We know it takes a lot of time and effort and thought and inspiration, and you know, that same group of qualities were certainly consistent with what David presented to us tonight. And I wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. And I hope that you'll be writing a book that we'll be able to read in the near future. All right, let's move on to our final award. And that is the 2021 AEL Foundation Scholarship. That's a $5,000 award to a single winner. And I'm very pleased to announce that this year's $5,000 award winner is Sophia Dupay from Yulee High School. She's currently a senior at the high school, and she currently works also for the Fernandina Beach Fire Department in Ocean Rescue. She's leaning towards study to be a flight nurse or travel trauma nurse at Florida State College. I want to thank the AEL Foundation, specifically the folks who made this possible. The foundation is a Fernandina Beach-based grant-making foundation, and the president of the organization is our former vice president, Betsy Odom. So I want to thank both Betsy and her husband, Rod, for their very generous funding of the scholarship, as well as their continuing support of the book festival. We're very appreciative of that. And Sophia, congratulations and the best, all the best to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
That's great. You'll notice if you go to our website too, that there is a feature article on you in the section that's identified as the scholarship section. And to all of our winners for the short story contest, your names will be posted as well on the website. So you can go there. It's the www.ameliaislandbookfestival.org. And we recommend that you keep up with looking at the website for the events in the upcoming year, and we hope you all will continue to participate. As a final note, I want to thank both Mark and Donna Kaufman of the Story and Bookstore. Mark and Donna made it possible for us to utilize their facilities tonight in order to do the online technical piece of this operation. And we are very thankful to them for that offer and for making this happen. So I don't know if they can hear me or not, maybe they're downstairs, but our sincere thanks on behalf of the Board of Directors for allowing us to use your space. So thank you all. Congratulations. Best of luck. David, thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you all during our 2022 festival year. Good night.